The Ring timeline is one of the most insane and convoluted chronologies that I've ever covered on this channel. Much like Sadako as well, I'm guessing most viewers in the Western world actually have no idea just how deep it goes. The earliest significant event in the Ring timeline comes in approximately 1949 when Christoph Eliot was born. Let's jump forward 2 decades to 1969, where Cristoph is now a student at MIT. His academic fields were computers and molecular biology. We never see a birth certificate for Cristoph, but in the third Ring series novel, Loop by Koji Suzuki, Eliot tells a 20-year-old character, "I was still a student at MIT. That's right, I was about the age that you are now." This was nearly 70 years ago. In the wake of the moon landing in 1969, the world became fascinated with all things cosmic, but Cristoph had no interest in outer space. Instead, his gaze was on a different world, one he was trying to build for himself. He wanted to combine his 2 fields of study to answer one question: was it possible to create artificial life within a computer? In the 1980s and 90s, computers were the new gods, and suddenly, Cristoph found himself with funding for his research. In the final years of the 20th century, he developed the first self-replicating program, software capable of evolving on its own. And when he introduced male and female parameters into the system, new life began to emerge within the simulation. We don't know the exact year this occurred, only that it was sometime just before the turn of the century. In the year 2000, Cristoph had accomplished what he had set out to do, but he now wanted to know if it were possible to create a biosphere on the same scale of Earth's in a virtual space. And so, the Loop project was born. Loop was a collaborative project between Japan and the United States, aimed at creating life within a virtual computer environment. The idea was to copy how evolution worked in the natural world, passing down DNA, allowing for changes and mistakes, and even simulating things like disease and immunity. In essence, the project sought to build an entirely new biosphere, a digital world that mirrored the real one. The hope was that within this simulated ecosystem, researchers might uncover insights into complex societal challenges, such as war, population growth, medicine, and even stock market changes. Cristoph gathered a team of experts from around the world: medical doctors, biologists, evolutionary theorists, geologists, historians, social scientists, and political scientists. To create such a complex computer program, you need some powerful hardware. 2 sites were set up, each containing 640,000 supercomputers. The first site was located beneath the desert in New Mexico, USA, with the second site across the ocean in the abandoned subway tunnels under Tokyo, Japan. While the creation of Loop might not seem significant, going back to the beginning allows us to lay out the complete timeline, better understand the lore, and the unraveling of Sadako's curse. If you want to learn everything that happens in the Ring timeline, how Sadako's iconic tape really affects victims, and how our own reality fits into the Ring world, then stick around to the end of this video. The Ring timeline is perhaps one of the most complex and esoteric cinematic universes ever created, a web of interwoven stories spanning books, films, TV shows, and cross-cultural remakes. I've come to realize that all of it has a place in the Ring canon. What was initially perceived as a chilling tale of supernatural horror evolved into a dense narrative touching on science fiction, technological paranoia, and even existential philosophy. Over the years, Ring has transformed from a simple ghost story into a reflection of our deepest fears, not just of death, but of the pitfalls of the information age, viruses, and the blurred line between reality and simulation. The Ring saga began as a novel written by Koji Suzuki, first published in Japan in 1991. Originally intended to be a psychological thriller, Suzuki's Ring kicked off what would become one of the most prolific and influential horror franchises in cinema. But if you've never read the novels, you've essentially only seen one droplet in an ocean of storytelling. You may also be surprised to learn that Suzuki is not a fan of traditional horror or the supernatural. Instead of tapping into the fear of the unknown by conjuring evil spirits, he finds terror in the unknown beyond the limits of science and human knowledge, even citing that the number pi is one of the most terrifying concepts to him. When you divide a circle's circumference by its diameter, you get a ratio that goes on forever without repeating, a number with no pattern and no end. The Ring saga spans 6 novels released over 22 years. Ring follows a journalist investigating a cursed videotape that kills anyone who watches it after 7 days. It was followed by Spiral, released in 1995, and Loop, released in 1998, which sees a major shakeup and explores the world of artificial simulation. It was quickly followed by a collection of short stories titled Birthday, released in 1999. S and Tide were the final 2 entries, released in 2012 and 2013, both twisting what we thought we knew about certain characters. But in order to fully understand the true scope of the Ring universe and how it spiraled into a multi-layered story of disease, reincarnation, and resurrection, we need to dive into the simulated world, Loop, which contains a few significant characters of its own. Loop itself was a large enough space for the inhabitants to believe that it was an endless universe. The scientists that created the world had established everything, from the laws of physics and soil conditions to the boiling point of water. Everything about Loop was identical to the natural world. The first 3 billion years in Loop took only 18 months in the natural world, but the creators began to worry when they saw little more than primitive life and single-cell organisms. In order to help along evolution in Loop, the scientists introduced RNA. RNA, also known as ribonucleic acid, is a molecule that helps carry genetic instructions from DNA to the parts of a cell that make proteins. Eventually, complex life forms began to appear, and Loop experienced its own Cambrian explosion in 541 million BCE. Some forms of life remained single-cell organisms and became the equivalent of bacteria and viruses, while others evolved into things that flew, swam, and crawled. Gender appeared, and with it, genetic information was now combined in more complex ways. Life forms equivalent to the dinosaurs appeared and became extinct. Mammals appeared, and eventually evolved into the ancestors of the equivalent of the human race. These intelligent life forms were observed communicating with one another. By using ones and zeros, they created language. After language, the inhabitants of Loop created their own wars, politics, culture, and art. As their history developed and became more and more complex, the amount of information being produced increased, and those overseeing the project observed time beginning to pass more slowly. After all, most computers have their processing limits. It now took 2 to 3 years in the natural world for the Loop to advance a few centuries. Now let's go back to the natural world. In 2012, a man named Hideyuki Futami joined the Loop project. Originally pre-med in college, he had changed his studies to logic and mathematics in grad school. But it wasn't long before his initial interest in the living world resurfaced, and he became interested in using the language of mathematics to explain life itself. During his time at grad school, Hideyuki met and fell in love with a woman named Machiko. After graduating, they married and moved to the Tokyo suburbs. The young couple struggled to have children, but Hideyuki was soon offered a job on the Loop project. He worked as a researcher and as part of the team responsible for creating a computer simulation of the emergence of life. Hideyuki is going to be important, but for now, let's catch that info and we'll revisit him later. Because back in the Loop, Sadako's story was about to unfold. This video is sponsored by DeleteMe. Here at CZsWorld, we love a good horror villain, but what we don't love is an actual villain, like the one that buys your home address online. It's a reality that we're cursed with in 2025, but thankfully, like the cursed videotape and Ring, there's a charm. DeleteMe. DeleteMe scrubs your personal info harder than the cleaning crew after shooting a gruesome death scene. Your phone number, home address, and even your family info is removed from data broker websites that sell it to anyone. And I mean anyone. Scammers, spammers, stalkers. It's basically a slasher movie where you're the main character. I signed up for DeleteMe, and within days, they found my info on over 20 websites. It was like opening a cursed book and seeing my whole life printed inside. But DeleteMe went to work removing it, and they keep checking all year long to make sure it stays gone. If you create content, go to horror conventions, or just don't want weirdos showing up at your house, DeleteMe is a no-brainer. Go to joindeleteme.com/CZsWorld and use code CZsWorld to get 20% off. That's joindeleteme.com/CZsWorld and use code CZsWorld to get access to the #1 data removal service. In 1925, a woman named Shizuko Yamamura was born on Izu Oshima, a volcanic island off the coast of Japan. She spent her adult years between her home island and Tokyo. Shizuko was a powerful clairvoyant, and her powers had caught the attention of Professor Heiichiro Akuma, who specialized in the study of paranormal powers. The pair became a sensation in the newspapers, with the media ultimately taking a less than kind attitude towards Shizuko's abilities. The pair struck up a romantic relationship, and in 1947, Shizuko became pregnant and gave birth to what they perceived to be their daughter, Sadako Yamamura. Of course, there was no way of knowing just how important Sadako would become to both Loop and the natural world. Sadako is one of the most significant entries on this timeline. Like her mother, she was a powerful clairvoyant, ultimately more powerful than Shizuko. The young psychic was able to predict future events, such as the eruption of Mount Mihara in 1957 when she was 10 years old. She displayed a level of control over people's will and was able to create psychic photography, also known as thoughtography, the ability to burn images from the mind onto photographic film. During the 1950s, Sadako split time between Izu Oshima with her mother's family and Tokyo with her parents. April 17, 1954 saw Shizuko give birth to her second child, a boy named Tetsuo Yamamura. Rumors began to fly around Izu Oshima that the boy had become ill and died after only 4 months. Yet, there was no gravestone in the Ryutanji Temple graveyard where the rest of the Yamamura family were buried, and his death was never added to the family register. The child hadn't actually died and was living in Tokyo. In 1955, Sadako's father Ikuma challenged the media to a public demonstration of Shizuko's psychic powers. He was determined to prove persistent accusations of fraud wrong. The task was simple. All she had to do was identify the numbers on a pair of dice sealed inside of a lead container. Shizuko had been reluctant and faltered, unable to perform in front of so many people, convinced that they had already made up their minds. After the disastrous public demonstration, betrayed by her lover Ikuma and branded a fraud and monster by the media, Shizuko wanted to disappear. So she made a plan to fake her own death with the help of a childhood friend. The following year, in 1956, she returns to Izuoshima with Sadako. One day, Shizuko climbed to the top of Mount Mihara and left behind some of her belongings with a note, leaving the impression that she had jumped into the volcano. Shizuko then escaped the island on her friend's boat and rejoined her son Tetsuo in Tokyo. At 8 years old, Sadako was now abandoned by both of her parents as her father left and was committed to a sanatorium in South Hakone the same year. The young clairvoyant spent the rest of her childhood on Izuoshima with her mother's cousin, Takashi Yamamura. Shizuko later met and remarried to a man named Shozo Takayama. They both changed their identities, with the mom Shizuko becoming Mizuho Takayama and her son Tetsuo becoming Ryuji Takayama. I'm gonna continue to refer to Shizuko using her original name, but I'll refer to Tetsuo using his new name, Ryuji, going forward. And we'll come back to Ryuji soon. And if you're already confused, don't worry, I'll remind you who everyone is when we come back to them. For now, just remember that Ryuji is Sadako's secret little brother. In the summer of 1965, a now 18-year-old Sadako graduated high school and moved to Tokyo in hopes of becoming an actress. But in the summer of the following year, Sadako left her acting troupe to visit her real father at South Hakone Sanatorium. While there, she was assaulted and killed by Dr. Nagao, a doctor working at the sanatorium who was at the time infected with smallpox. During his attack on Sadako, he discovered that she had testicular feminization syndrome, now more commonly known as androgen insensitivity syndrome, or AIS, a condition where a person who is genetically male with one X and one Y chromosome is born with a body that does not respond to male sex hormones, androgens, in the usual way. As a result, the person may have some or all of the physical traits typically associated with females, despite having male chromosomes. In Sadako's case, she had breasts, a vagina, and testicles, but no uterus. This is a real condition that affects at most 0.005% of male births, basically up to 1 in every 20,000. So yeah, technically Sadako is actually a male with female aspects. However, when I made my Pennywise video and correctly referred to it as she the whole time, people still got confused, even though I explained the reasoning. And Sadako is perceived by most characters as female, so it just makes it easier and less confusing if I use the word she. Anyway, to hide his crime, Dr. Nagao dropped her body down a well in the grounds of the sanatorium and slid the stone lid over the top, hiding Sadako from the world for 24 years in loop time. During the late 60s, with advancements in medical treatments and a decline in tuberculosis cases, the South Hakone Sanatorium was forced to become a general hospital, with it eventually closing in 1972. In 1975, the land was bought up by Pacific Resorts, who set about developing a golf course. Over the next few years, they added a tennis court, an athletic club, and a restaurant. Then, in 1990, they added a series of holiday villa cabins. Nothing significant happened in Loop until February 17, 1986, when Takanori Ando was born. Takanori's father, Mitsuo Ando, was a close friend of Sadako's secret brother, Ryuji Takayama. They were both in med school together. While Mitsuo went on to become a doctor, Ryuji went on to study philosophy and mathematics. On June 18, 1989, while having a family trip to the beach on the Toei coastline, 3-year-old Takanori drowned and was declared dead. We'll come back to Takanori and Mitsuo Ando, but for now, we jump forward in the loop again to the 90s, where Sadako's anger was about to be unleashed thanks to one unsuspecting family. On Saturday, August 25th, 1990, the Kaneko family arrived at cabin B4, the cabin that sat directly above the well where Sadako's remains were hidden. The young son was a fan of a comedy series that was broadcast every Sunday at 8 p.m. He brought a videotape with him, planning to record the show and watch it later. He had set the tape to record before heading out to play tennis with his sister, and the two didn't return until after 10 p.m. They'd forgotten all about the tape, which had been left running the entire time. Meanwhile, deep within the well, Sadako focused all of her rage and psychic energy on the video deck in cabin B4. Through a form of psychic photography, she imprinted disturbing images directly onto the tape. But the recording wasn't just eerie visuals. Embedded within the footage was her curse, a deadly virus formed from her own DNA and the smallpox that she had contracted from Dr. Nagao just moments before her death. But Sadako's virus, the ring virus, wasn't biological, it was digital. I'll go into this in more detail later on, but essentially, the ring virus is a computer virus introduced into Loop, the simulated world, from the outside. We don't know exactly how or why it appeared, but the scientists in the natural world believe that it was introduced by someone actually working on the Loop project. I feel that the parallels between biological life forms and computers are something that Suzuki wants us to notice. A lot of the scientists working on the Loop project, for example, worked in multiple fields of science, both biological and technological, because at their core, they're incredibly similar systems. A computer virus spreads through networks, replicates itself, and disrupts normal functions. Just like a biological virus infects cells, multiplies, and causes damage to living organisms, DNA can be thought of as biological code. It contains the instructions that shape every living thing, much like how computer code dictates the behavior of software. When errors occur in DNA, we call them mutations. In technology, those errors are bugs. And just as living organisms evolve over time through natural selection, artificial intelligence systems adapt through machine learning. The next day, Monday the 27th, the Kaneko family left the cabin, leaving the tape in the VCR machine. 2 days later, on Wednesday, August 29th, 4 teens named Tomoko Oishi, Shuichi Iwata, Haruko Tsuchi, and Takehiko Nomi booked into cabin B4. But they found themselves bored in the house, bored due to the bad weather outside. That's when they discovered the videotape in the VCR and watched it. The tape contained a collection of disturbing images and ended with a curse. Those who have viewed these images are fated to die at this exact hour 1 week from now. If you do not wish to die, you must follow these instructions exactly. And by watching this video, you have now also watched the contents of the cursed videotape, so now you need to watch the entire video to have any chance at survival. Scared by the images they just saw on the VHS tape, one of the teens wrote a warning in the guest book. Thursday, August 30th, Ulf, consider yourself warned. You'd better not see it unless you've got the guts. You'll be sorry you did. When one of the teens rewound the tape, she recorded over the last minutes of footage, erasing the instructions on how to survive. Not taking it seriously, she wanted to take the tape with them and use it to prank their friends. But not wanting to risk the curse following them, the rest of the group refused. This brings us to the first official entry on the timeline. On September 5th at 10:54 p.m., exactly 7 days after watching the videotape, Tomoko Oishi is killed at her home as a result of Sadako's curse. At this exact moment across town, outside of Shinagawa Station, Shuichi Iwata is killed while riding his motorcycle, and Takehiko Nomi and Haruko Tsuji are killed inside of a locked car parked at the side of the road. All 4 teens who had watched the tape had instantly perished. A month later, Kazuyuki Asakawa, the uncle of Oishi, discovers the 4 deaths and the fact that they all seemingly died of heart failure at the exact same time. Despite his personal attachment, his journalistic instincts kicked in, and he believed there was a story behind the deaths, so he decided to investigate further. The footage you're seeing depicts Asakawa as female, which I'll explain later, but basically the character is male in the book but female in the movie, so use your imagination. After visiting his niece's home, Asakawa discovers a link between the 4 teens and a cabin at the Pacific Resort, so he travels to South Hakone in search of answers. Asakawa books into cabin B4 on Thursday, October 11th and searches the building. The reporter finds the guest book and comes across the message left by one of the teens, which in turn leads to the videotape. Asakawa watches the tape back in the cabin. When it's finished, the phone rings and Asakawa senses something concealing itself, watching from the darkness. Terrified, Asakawa leaves the cabin at exactly 10:18, taking the tape with him on the way out. On Friday, October 12th, Asakawa meets with an old school friend, Ryuji Takayama, the son of Shizuka. Again, I should address that the footage portrays Ryuji as Asakawa's ex-husband, not an old friend, but again, I will explain this later. Ryuji was a man obsessed with understanding the universe. He was a lecturer at Fukuzawa University, specializing in philosophy and mathematics. Outside of his profession, he was also skilled in the world of paranormal psychology, believing it likely held the answers to unlocking the structure of the universe. Asakawa, knowing there would be no one else who would believe the supernatural aspect of the tape, showed it to Ryuji. Wanting to study the images further, Ryuji asked Asakawa to make him a copy. The pair then used their 7 days to find answers and hopefully a cure to the curse, aka the main events of Ringu. The need to find a way to save themselves is made even more important when Asakawa discovers that his wife and daughter watched the tape on October 14th. The footage shows a son, but again, we'll come back to that. The clues held within the tape's images lead them to discover the identities of Shizuko and Sadako Yamamura, eventually visiting their home island on Izu Oshima on October 16th. Asakawa was skeptical about the supposed supernatural powers held by Shizuko and Sadako, but to Ryuji, it wasn't superstition. It's a reality staring you in the face. All we're seeing is one small part of a continually changing phenomenon. Ryuji's view suggests that reality as we experience it is only a fraction of the whole, and sometimes there are people like Sadako who are able to access parts of the simulation that the rest of us can't see. If the world is a simulation, then what we call the supernatural, psychic abilities, or curses might not be supernatural at all, but simply glitches or intentional backdoors in the system's code. Rare points of access to deeper layers of reality that most of us are locked out of. Ryuji, Asakawa, and a colleague of Asakawa's uncovered the backstory of Sadako, leading them to Dr. Nagao, who they discovered on October 18th, day 7 of their curse. Ryuji and Asakawa paid him a visit at his new pediatric clinic. As soon as they saw Nagao, they recognized him as a man from a scene on the videotape. With a little persuasion from Ryuji, the doctor eventually admitted to what he did to Sadako, including where he left her body. Asakawa showed Dr. Nagao a map of the grounds of the old sanatorium, determining that the well was directly under cabin B4 at the Pacific Resort. Believing that Sadako wanted to be found and laid to rest, Ryuji and Asakawa returned to South Akane, crawled beneath the cabin, uncovered the old well, and eventually discovered Sadako's remains. Asakawa's deadline passed, and the curious reporter survived the curse. The next day, Friday, October 19th, Asakawa returned once more to Izuoshima to return the remains of Sadako to her family. Meanwhile, back in Tokyo, Ryuji returned home. But it wasn't long before Ryuji sensed that something was wrong and realized that death was coming for him. At first, his mind was filled with confusion, wondering why death hadn't come for Asakawa. Despite his body being consumed with cold sweats and pains, his mind managed to stay clear. Using what moments he had left, Ryuji searched for answers. In the very last moments before his death, Ryuji, perhaps thanks to his philosophy and mathematics background, had come to understand everything. By asking himself how the tape and its curse could be possible, he had found the answer. His world was an imaginary space, an artificial, simulated world. Now he searched for a connection to the world's creator. He searched the VHS, scoured his apartment, and finally replayed the tape, frantically scanning the images for a clue. Ryuji screamed with realization and immediately dialed the number sequence shown on the dice within one of the scenes. The call connected, and in his last seconds of life, at 9:49 p.m., Ryuji blurted out, "Bring me to your world." His request was not out of fear of death. What moved him was the insatiable thirst for knowledge. On the brink of his demise, Ryuji's greatest desire was to cross from his virtual world into the natural one. Philosophically, it's a form of epistemic bravery, the willingness to confront the true nature of existence, even if it means losing everything you thought was real. On Saturday, October 20th, Ryuji's body was taken to the Tokyo Medical Examiner's office, where his autopsy was conducted by Mitsuo Ando, his old school friend. The cause of death was ruled as myocardial infarction, in other words, a heart failure. But Ando had also noticed peculiar spots in Ryuji's throat and took a sample in for testing. As the body was stuffed and sealed, Mitsuo noticed a piece of paper sticking out of some of the stitches. The paper read 178 and 136. Back in their college days, he, Ryuji, and their friends would send each other coded puzzles. This led Mitsuo to believe that the numbers on the piece of paper were a coded message from his old friend. Assigning letters to each number, it formed the word ring. That night, Asakawa learned of Ryuji's death from one of Ryuji's students, Mei Takano. On Sunday, October 21st, worried for the safety of his wife and daughter who had also watched the tape, Asakawa desperately tried to figure out why he survived, but Ryuji hadn't. The spirit of Ryuji led Asakawa to a book on the shelf, the fictional book titled Epidemics in Man. In it, he found a quotation: "A virus's instinct is to reproduce. A virus usurps living structures in order to reproduce itself." Asakawa realized that he'd made a copy of the tape. In other words, he had helped Sadako's virus reproduce. Believing this was the key to survival, he drove to his in-laws with the videotape and a VCR, intending for his wife and daughter to make copies and show them to the in-laws. Depending on how he feels about his in-laws, possibly taking care of two problems at once. Believing he had just saved his family from Sadako's curse, he drove them back home. But the curse wasn't finished with them quite yet. At 10 a.m. on October 21st, Asakawa's wife and daughter died simultaneously of heart failure while sitting in the back of the car. Once Asakawa realized this, he became distracted and collided with a truck on Metropolitan Bayside Expressway. Asakawa was hospitalized in a coma. On October 30th, Mitsuo Ando, the guy who had been friends with Ryuji, met with Mei Takano, Ryuji's student. She had some questions about her professor's death after Asakawa mentioned a videotape. She wondered if he could have seen something on the tape that caused his heart failure. Mitsuo reassured Mei that the death was due to a blockage in the heart. This sets into motion the main events of the second novel, Spiral, which follows the investigation of Mitsuo. But it turned out that Ryuji's death was a lot more complicated than Mitsuo had thought. A colleague named Miyashita called Mitsuo with the results of Ryuji's biopsy. They'd found a strain of smallpox, and considering smallpox had been declared extinct in Japan in 1977, Mitsuo was reluctant to believe the results. But if the virus had returned, then logic would say that there must be other victims. Miyashita agreed to check if there were reports of other cases. On November 1st, Miyashita informed Mitsuo that he discovered 6 cases. The 14 who had died on September 5th, and Asakawa's wife and daughter who died on October 21st all had the smallpox virus in their bodies. When Mitsuo heard Asakawa's name, he became concerned that all of the 7 victims were connected, and he became worried for Mei's safety. She was Ryuji's student and could have contracted the virus. Later that same day, Mei, in search of a missing piece of her professor's manuscript, found his copy of the videotape and watched it. At the time, Mei was ovulating, and instead of attacking her coronary artery and killing her, the ring virus fertilized her egg. The result, as insane as it may sound, was that Mei was now pregnant with a clone of Sadako. On November 5th, Mitsuo tried to locate the VCR machine he'd seen in Asakawa's car in photos of the traffic accident. He also visited Asakawa at the hospital, finding that he was still in a coma. We're not given a date in the novel, but we do know that it was the Monday after the 3-day weekend. Given this was the first week of November, that narrows it down to Culture Day, which is held on November 3rd in Japan, and looking at a calendar from 1990, this means that it must have been Monday, November 5th. After 1 week, Sadako had reached full term and taken complete control of Mei's body.
It's a voodoo pregnancy. It's accelerated.
No, it's not voodoo, but it is accelerated, much like how the beginning of the loop's history could be processed at super speed by the processing power of the computers. On November 7th, Mei, now controlled by Sadako, climbed to the roof of an office building, tied a rope, and lowered herself into a shaft, where the next day, Sadako was reborn, climbing up the rope and leaving Mei behind. With a sprained ankle and no way out, Mei remains trapped in the shaft, eventually dying of exposure 10 days later. Concerned when she missed the date they had planned, Mitsuo visited Mei's apartment, room 303 at the Shinagawa View Heights apartment complex on November 15th. She was gone, but he found Ryuji's videotape in the VCR with its contents now erased. Over the next week, Ando met with Asakawa's colleague and recovered a floppy disk from Asakawa's laptop containing a manuscript titled Ring, containing every detail of the images contained on the tape and of Asakawa and Ryuji's investigation. Basically the in-universe version of the book Ring. Mitsuo and his colleague Miyashita both read the manuscript and theorized about the cure for the ring virus. Asakawa had believed that it was to make a copy of the tape, but with the death of his family, that theory fell apart. On Saturday, November 24th, Ando returns to Mei's apartment and saw a now grown Sadako for the first time, but was unaware of her true identity. 2 days later, Mitsuo's fears were confirmed when Mei's body was brought into the medical examiner's office. During the following week, Asakawa died of an infection in the hospital, and Mitsuo met Sadako once again, who told him that she'd call soon with a request. We then jump forward to January 1991. When the cell samples of all 11 victims of the ring virus were studied, it was discovered that there was a variation between them. The shape of the virus in 9 of the victims was shaped like a ring band with a stone at the top, but in Mei and Asakawa's samples, the ring bands were mostly broken, almost snake-like in appearance. 9 of the victims contracted the ring virus and died exactly 1 week later. But Asakawa and Mei survived because both of them helped reproduce Sadako. Mei literally gave birth to a Sadako clone, and Asakawa gave birth to the manuscript Ring. In doing so, they each helped spread the virus that is Sadako. When the 4 teenagers erased the end of the videotape, they unknowingly caused the virus to mutate. In biology, genetic mutation is often the driving force behind evolution, a copying error that alters the genetic code and is passed down. The same thing happened here. The erased footage disrupted the chain sequence, its genetic chain of images. That broken code was then replicated in every copy. Eventually, Asakawa's original tape was lost and Ryuji's copy was erased. The original vessel for the curse had gone extinct, or should I say, the original strain. But the virus had already moved on. It no longer needed the tape. Through copying, it had evolved into a new form, the manuscript written by Asakawa. Within its pages, the ring virus lived on, reborn through words rather than images. Realizing this, Mitsuo and Miyashita tested their blood for the virus. Both of their results came back positive, but months had passed since they had read the manuscript, and they were both still alive. They didn't yet know the reason. On Saturday, January 13th, Mitsuo once again encountered Sadako, who is now going by the name Masako Maruyama. Going forward, I'll refer to her as Masako, the Sadako clone. Still unaware of her true identity, Mitsuo gave in to his desire and spent the night with her. But the next evening, he finally uncovered the truth. He received a fax from Sadako's old acting troupe containing her headshots. Horrified, Mitsuo ran out of his apartment in fear. The woman he had been sleeping with appeared to be Sadako, the same figure believed to have died 25 years prior. I know this is an insanely complex timeline already, so let me just do a quick recap of the important stuff. Cristoph creates the loop, the computer simulation of life. Inside the loop, the psychic girl Sadako and her brother Ryuji are separated from a young age. Sadako is killed, but her curse kills 9 people who watch a video, and now, like a corrupted file on your computer, the virus is infecting other subjects. Those who read Asakawa's manuscript, Ring, are becoming impregnated with Sadako's DNA and giving birth to a Sadako clone. In the early hours of November 16th, still operating on loop time, the curious medical examiner Mitsuo returned to his apartment with his colleague Miyashita and discovered a letter left behind by Masako, the Sadako clone. In it, she explained how she had been reborn and made a request of her new lover. In exchange for his help, she offered him the one thing he longed for most, the return of his son, Takanori Ando, who had drowned in 1989 at the age of 3. Mitsuo realized this was the reason that he and Miyashita had been allowed to survive the virus. Sadako needed them alive. with his background in medical science. Mitsuo recognized that her sparing him wasn't mercy, it was strategy. Mitsuo was faced with an impossible decision: help Sadako and get his son back, or refuse and be killed. Ultimately, Sadako would have always found someone else to help her, but this way, Mitsuo could still get the thing that he desired most. Still, I can't help but wonder, could any outcome justify helping her? Even without knowing the full extent of her intentions, Mitsuo understood the threat that she posed. 9 people were already dead, and her sphere of influence was rapidly spreading. Who could say how far her abilities would go? While Sadako previously had no uterus, reborn, she now had a womb and was able to reproduce asexually. The next step was for Mitsuo to remove her egg and replace its DNA with the DNA of the individual that they wanted to bring back to life. Mitsuo then returned the egg with its newly implanted nucleus into Sadako's womb. A week later, the fetus crawled out of her womb, and a week after that, it had grown to the age of the person it was when they died. So on June 27th, 1991, Mitsuo Ando and his son returned to the beach where Takanori had once drowned. There, Mitsuo was reunited with a now reborn Ryuji Takayama, but Mitsuo wasn't exactly happy to be reunited with his old friend. Mitsuo felt betrayed, convinced that Ryuji had been manipulating the events from behind the scenes. It was Ryuji's body in which he found the coded message, Ring. It was Ryuji's missing manuscript page that ultimately led Mei Takano, his own student, to watch the cursed videotape. And it was Ryuji's autopsy that exposed the trace of smallpox, the clue that eventually guided Mitsuo to Asakawa's Ring manuscript. To Mitsuo, the pattern was clear. Ryuji had aligned himself with Sadako, aiding in her rebirth and helping spread the virus that she carried. There was no way an inhabitant of the simulated world could possibly know why Ryuji had been resurrected. But I'll come back to that. I know I've been saying that a lot, but just trust me. Many hours have been spent thinking about the best way to explain this timeline in a way that will not completely overwhelm you with information, which is possibly all about to go out the window. As I mentioned, Asakawa's manuscript was eventually published as Ring in 1991, but what I haven't mentioned yet was that it was followed by 5 sequels: Spiral in 1995, Loop in 1998, Birthday in 1999, S in 2012, and Tide in 2013. Over 1 million copies of Ring were sold in various languages, with each person reading it contracting the Ring virus. The Ring novel was eventually made into a made-for-TV film in 1995, which was the most accurate adaptation of the original story. Just as in the book, Asakawa was male and Ryuji was his old school friend. In 1998, a theatrical remake was released titled Ringu, one of the most iconic movies in all of horror and a personal favorite of mine. This adaptation saw major changes to the story though. Asakawa was now a female character with a son named Yoichi instead of a daughter, and Ryuji Takayama was now her ex-husband instead of an old school friend. Changes were also made to the method of how Sadako killed her victims, portrayed as less of a virus and more of a curse, with the striking image of Sadako crawling out of the TV. The producers of Ringu cast the part of Sadako through an open casting call. The reborn Sadako, who had changed her name to Masuko Maruyama, auditioned. After all, she had once dreamed of being an actress, and with her professional training, she got the role. By playing herself in the film, this allowed her to project her thoughts into the VHS tape. That is, the prop in the film. So when the movie showed the cursed videotape, it actually carried her genetic information. After its release, any woman who watched it while ovulating became pregnant, and a week later gave birth to a Sadako clone. Then the women's bodies were discarded. Those Sadakos were then able to reproduce asexually and give birth to another Sadako. This was reproduction on an explosive level. Ringu spawned 2 direct sequels. The first was Spiral in 1998, an adaptation of the second novel. When that financially failed, Ring 2 was released in 1999. While both films include Sadako's plan to be reborn, Spiral centered on the medical examiner Mitsuo Ando's investigation into the biological nature of Sadako's virus and her supposed collaboration with Ryuji, while Ring 2 focused more on Mei Takano's supernatural abilities and Sadako wanting to be reborn through Ryuji's son, Yoichi. Spiral interpreted Ryuji's actions as allying with Sadako, and included that in their portrayal of his character. 1999 began to see the spread of the evolved virus overseas, with the release of the Korean adaptation, The Ring Virus. Back in Japan, 2000 saw the release of Ring Zero Birthday, which explored the backstory of Sadako, giving audiences a sympathetic portrayal of the character. Then, in 2002, an American remake was released under the title The Ring. Once again, this adaptation saw changes made to the story, with the character of Sadako being renamed to Samara. The financial success of the Western remake spawned 2 American sequels, The Ring 2 in 2005 and the less successful Rings in 2017. Back in Japan, they moved away from the original trilogy of Ring, Ring 2, and Ring Zero Birthday, and returns to doing loose adaptations of the novels. Sadako 3D, which was loosely based on S, was released in 2012, following the search of a serial killer who was going after the remaining Sadako clones. Then, Sadako, which was loosely based on Tide, was released in 2019. This one has a character who re-examines the foundational events of Ring to try to understand and stop a new virus that has arisen. Don't worry, I will explain both of those in greater detail when we get there. The point I'm trying to make here is that if the author author of the books, Koji Suzuki, is to be believed, then you and I and everything around us are currently living in the loop, or at least some version of it. We are actually all part of the simulation described in the Ring series. And all the movies, adaptations, and different versions and iterations that you may know as the Ring franchise are actually just in-universe multimedia series that exist inside of the loop. There's proof of this because the source novels mention movie adaptations of the story, just like the ones that actually exist in our world, and the author, Koji Suzuki, even exists in universe. The cinematic multiverse also includes a crossover into another popular Japanese horror franchise, Ju-on the Grudge, with the release of Sadako vs. Kayako in 2016, which brought in an even wider audience. What's interesting about the spread of Ring as a multimedia franchise is how closely it mirrors the spread of real viruses. By nature, a virus's purpose is simple: to spread, adapt, and survive, sometimes mutating in the process to infect new hosts or resist threats to its existence. Sadako's Ring virus behaves in the same way. It begins as a virus hidden within the images of the videotape, then mutates into the novel, Ring, eventually evolving into a range of multimedia. The Ring franchise mimics this behavior. What started as a novel evolved into film, manga, television series, video games, and radio shows. It even mutated to spread across borders, adapting to a new cultural host, just like a virus jumping species. So next time someone tells you an entertainment franchise you love only has 12 sequels and 4 remakes because the producers are money-hungry corporate gluttons, remind them that the series may actually be a substantial virus trying to adapt and survive by infecting as many people as possible, which may actually be the same thing. Over the decades, more and more women gave birth to Sadakos, who then gave birth to more Sadakos. Eventually, all diversity vanished, and all of the genetic patterns in the loop program became assimilated into one set pattern, that of Sadako Yamamura. The Ring virus had become the cancerization of the loop world, and sometime after 2022, it was frozen by the scientists working on the project in the natural world. Time stopped inside of Loop, and all of its inhabitants were frozen in place. So I guess this wasn't one-to-one our world. Which takes us back to what I call the natural world. When the loop was frozen, it was 2017 in the natural world. Earlier that year, loop creator Cristoph Eliot had experienced something that he never imagined. One of the loop inhabitants had made contact with him. When the loop denizen named Ryuji Takayama was dying, he had found a way to connect with the world outside the simulation. When he made the phone call that I detailed earlier, it was Eliot who would answer. Cristoph found Ryuji to be unique, and intrigued by his will and a drive to understand the universe, he granted his wish. The only thing Cristoph could do was extract genetic information from one of Ryuji's cells. He then used a genome synthesizer and the genome fragment alignment method to create DNA that would be valid in the natural world. Once he'd analyzed Ryuji's DNA sequence, it was essentially a matter of chemically synthesizing it. The next step was to prepare a fertilized human egg, extract its nucleus, and insert the man-made Ryuji nucleus in its place. Then, all he had to do was return the egg to the mother's body and wait for Ryuji to be born in the natural world. So, in short, the only way to grant Ryuji's wish and bring him into the real world was allow him to be born there as a baby. The safest way for Ryuji to grow up was to have him be raised by a participant in the Loop project. Eliot was aware of Hideyuki and his wife Machiko's fertility difficulties and guided them to the idea of adoption. Open to the idea, the couple were eventually given the newborn Ryuji and they renamed him to Kaoru Futami. Because of the sensitive nature of what they had done, the truth of it was hidden, even from Hideyuki, while baby Kaoru had no idea about his true identity. A consequence of bringing Ryuji to the natural world, unforeseen by all, was the escape of the Ring virus. Ryuji's genetic data was collected moments before he died. He was infected with the Ring virus at this time, so when they brought Ryuji into the real world, they also brought the virus that brought down everything right along with him. In the natural world, the Ring virus mutated into a new form of cancer. By choosing a common illness, it was able to blend in with other cancers as it laid its groundwork. It snuck into the natural world and began killing off the scientists on the Loop project one by one. The first victim recorded was a computer technician in New Mexico. It quickly spread worldwide, with the highest number of cases in America and Japan. The new cancer virus was proven to be viral in nature and was named the Metastatic human cancer virus. In 2027, Kaoru, now 10 years old and having inherited his father's curiosity about the living world, landed on a theory based on low gravity areas corresponding with longevity areas. This theory would lead him to the beginning of a lifelong desire to visit Four Corners in America, the border between the states of Colorado, Arizona, Utah, and New Mexico, that appeared to have an extreme gravitational anomaly. Even though he is Ryuji reborn, I'm going to refer to him as Kaoru going forward. So just remember, Kaoru equals Ryuji, but he doesn't fully realize it yet. We'll be following him through the main events of Loop. And Kaoru did not know that the gravitational anomaly was caused by the site of the supercomputers stationed under the desert ground. His eventual discovery of the correlation was not by chance. It was Christoph Eliot, the creator of Loop, guiding him from a distance by manipulating the data that Kaoru discovered. In 2030, Hideyuki, Kaoru's father, was diagnosed with the MHC virus, and over the course of the next 7 years, it spread further and further through his body until he was completely hospital-bound. In 2036, the MHC virus was isolated in a laboratory at the medical school of Fukuzawa University. As scientists began to understand it, panic spread across the globe. Once the cancer started, almost without exception, it metastasized and spread throughout the body with a frightful strength. With a 100% chance of metastasis, it was essentially impossible to completely recover from MHC. Even worse, the cancer cells created by this virus were immortal, meaning they would continue living indefinitely as long as their host didn't die. At some point in 2037, a 20-year-old Kaoru met and fell in love with Reiko Sugiura. The pair met at the hospital where Hideyuki, Kaoru's father, was being treated. Reiko's son was also hospitalized with the MHC virus. Reiko had also contracted MHC, but in spite of this, Kaoru began an intimate relationship with her. In spite of the virus being in his genes, Kaoru never contracted the MHC virus. Remember, the ring virus was in his DNA when he was extracted from the loop, so his immunity was likely due to a mutation happening during the RNA-DNA transcription process, or the process of DNA, the organism's master blueprint, being copied to RNA, the messenger that carries instructions for making proteins. That summer, Kaoru came across the chromosomal base sequence of the MHC virus, and the base sequence reminded him of binary code like from a computer. Aware of his father's role in the Loop project, he began to suspect Loop was the origin of the MHC virus. After speaking to a colleague of his father's at the Loop Research Center in Tokyo, Kaoru learned about the creation of the Loop world, his father's role in the project, and its eventual cancerization and subsequent freezing. Basically everything he could have learned by watching the first half of this video. This is why you should subscribe to CZsWorld. It may come in handy in your real life if you are, in fact, a main character. Wanting more answers, Kaoru was directed to a researcher named Kenneth Rothman living in Los Alamos, New Mexico. Kaoru was struck by the coincidences that had been piling up over the years, all leading him to Four Corners, or more specifically, New Mexico. One thing his father's colleague couldn't explain was the origin of the ring virus within Loop. The ring virus had no logical basis in the closed system of the simulated world. According to the laws of science coded into Loop, the same ones that governed the natural world, such a virus couldn't have evolved there naturally. It broke the rules. The ring virus violated the very foundation that the simulation was based on. Loop was designed to be an exact copy of our world, governed by the same physical and biological laws. So anything that couldn't evolve in the natural world, like a virus that spreads through a video and carries DNA, should be impossible. Its very presence suggested external involvement. The leading theory among the scientists was that it had been introduced from the outside, not biologically, but digitally, a computer virus. Someone in the natural world had inserted it into the simulation. Whether it was sabotage, an experiment gone wrong, or something else entirely, no one knows for sure. However, another theory is that the virus didn't come from outside, but from within, from the deep unmapped regions of the simulation's data. Just as physicists believe that over 90% of the universe is made up of dark matter that we can't see, and biologists have yet to determine the purpose of nearly 90% of our DNA, Loop 2 was built on foundations that its creators didn't fully understand. In that vast ocean of unknown code, something could have emerged. A fragment of corrupted logic, a buried anomaly, or something hiding in the system's blind spots. Events continued to spiral for Kaoru. No pun intended. His father's cancer worsened. The MHC virus was confirmed to affect not only humans, but also animals and plant life. And Reiko's son, Ryuji, passed away after choosing not to fight the virus any longer. Soon after, Reiko discovered she was pregnant with Kaoru's child. Fearing that the unfolding events in Loop were a reflection of what was happening in the natural world, Kaoru became increasingly concerned for the safety of his unborn child. He made a decision to travel to New Mexico. If the MHC virus had originated within the simulation, then understanding its source might be the key to stopping it and saving both worlds. Kaoru then flew to America and traveled until he reached Wayne's Rock, the last known address of Kenneth Rothman, one of the last remaining scientists from the Loop project. What he found was an abandoned ghost town. There was no trace of living things. The people living there had abandoned it or died. The buildings were crumbling, and the trees had turned cancerous. The distant voice on a radio led Kaoru to the basement of what was once Kenneth Rothman's house. There, he discovered a computer and headset that allowed him to view the Loop world. In the space of hours, he relived the entire life of an inhabitant of Loop. As I've discussed throughout the video, the passage of time fluctuated within Loop. In the beginning, 3 billion years passed within a year and a half of natural world time. With the addition of war, language, art, politics, and the growth of technology, time began to pass much slower. The life Kaoru experienced took place in the 1800s before the Industrial Revolution. Hours in the natural world equaled years in the Loop. By the time Ryuji and Asakawa were investigating Sadako, time was multiplied by 6. So 1 hour in the natural world equaled about 6 hours in Loop. And 1 day in the natural world was equal to about 6 days in Loop. You get the idea. By the time the Loop became cancerized, time had begun to speed up again. Most animals and plant life had died out, and all of the humanoid inhabitants had become Sadako. So there was far less data for the supercomputers to process, and the events between Ryuji's death in 1990 and the loop being frozen in 2022 all actually took place within the space of 9 months natural world time. Kaoru realized that he had been guided this entire time, leading him to New Mexico. The life he experienced in Loop was a pre-chosen one. It was left open for him to stumble upon. What he had seen in Loop was showing him where he needed to go next, a mountain deeper in the desert. During his journey up the mountain, Kaoru was caught in a storm and ended up huddled beside a rock on the edge of death. But his journey to the mountains was also expected, and he was rescued by Cristoph Eliot, the creator of Loop. Cristoph was the man who had been working in the background, manipulating Kaoru and guiding him to this very location. His true plan had begun 20 years ago when he brought Ryuji Takayama from the simulated world to the natural world. And finally, meeting the grown-up version of him was a key factor in his plan to save the world. After reconnecting with the now adult Kaoru, the boy who was reincarnated in the natural world using the DNA of Sadako's secret brother, Ryuji, Loop creator Cristoph Eliot began to explain his plan. 36 years before, in 2001, scientists discovered a remarkable breakthrough. By firing neutrinos at an object, measuring their phase shift, and then recomposing the data, they could create a detailed 3-dimensional digital image of its structure. This was far beyond DNA analysis or LiDAR mapping. While DNA only offered a snapshot, a single cell out of billions, neutrino scanning could capture everything: brain activity, muscle tension, even memory. Not long after the inception of the Loop project, another team began work on a powerful new machine, the Neutron Scanning Capture System, or NSCS. This device would allow them to record the complete molecular makeup of a living organism. Cristoph had an idea to use this capture system to completely digitize a human's molecular structure. In other words, you could go into the game. Every neckbeard Discord mod's greatest fantasy. But in practice, finding a willing test subject wasn't as easy as posting on r/incels, because once you go into the simulation, there's no coming back. The NSCS would destroy your physical body. But Cristoph theorized if he extracted someone from Loop, he could use the NSCS to send them back home. Cloning was the only way to bring someone out of the loop. However, sending someone into the loop was a different story. The NSCS made it possible to reconstruct a person inside the simulation, with consciousness and memories all intact. You wouldn't just be a copy, you'd be yourself, down to the very last neuron. So Cristoph finally told Kaoru about Ryuji Takayama and his role in bringing the ring virus to the natural world, and revealed to a stunned Kaoru that he was in fact Ryuji. Kaoru was shaken by the revelation, but came to accept it. He began watching footage from the loop of Ryuji's life, wanting to know the man that he came from. A one-of-a-kind window into his past life. Cristoph believed the key to overcoming the MHC virus was hidden somewhere within Kaoru. Because Kaoru was immune to the ring virus, a gene insertion method based on his immunity could provide the breakthrough needed to cure MHC, both in Loop and in the natural world. Kaoru understood that the ring virus entered the natural world through him and accepted that his return to the Loop was inevitable. He had set out to find a cure, and in a way he had succeeded, though not in the way that he imagined. Kaoru agreed to re-enter Loop willingly on one condition. Once a cure was found, his father, Hideyuki, and his lover, Reiko, must be the first to receive it. In some ways, Loop and the natural world influenced each other. The microscopic and the macroscopic, the digital and the organic, were entangled in a feedback loop. Like two halves of a larger system, they moved in sync, each responding to changes in the other. But what happens when that cycle is interrupted? When one part of a closed loop stalls or mutates, it destabilizes the whole. Arresting the flow on one end, whether it's a virus in Loop or a disruption in the natural world, sends ripples through the other. The balance is thrown off, and the consequences aren't limited to just one side. To Kaoru, it was as though the cancer-ridden Loop, frozen in time, had been reaching out to the natural world. The natural world and Loop were to be reconnected. While the original goal was just to find real-world solutions to the MHC virus, it was now clear that it was equally critical to alter the course of Loop's descent into cancerization. That responsibility now fell to Kaoru. They couldn't return to the very beginning, but to prevent the catastrophe that had unfolded in the simulated world, they had to intervene somewhere. So everything that had happened since 1990 would be preserved as data, stored in the system's memory banks, but those events themselves would be erased to start anew. Loop would start again in 1991, creating an alternate timeline. I like to refer to this as the Loop save state. It's like in a video game where you save right before an important moment so that you can go back and do it right if you mess up. I used to do this in Pokemon as a kid right before battling a legendary Pokemon. You only get one chance to catch it, so if it gets away, you turn off that Game Boy and load up again right before the encounter and repeat the process until you do it right. To re-enter the loop, Kaoru was transported to the NSCS. The neutrino bombardment intensified until his molecular structure began to take a digital form, and all that was left behind were the liquefied remains of his destroyed cells. In January 1991, in the new save state, Ryuji Takayama had been dead in loop for 3 months. Thanks to the combined efforts of Mitsuo Ando, the scientist and old school friend of Ryuji, and his colleague Miyashita, Ryuji had been reborn. His DNA was planted into the womb of Sadako, and he was born a week later, and the following week, he had already grown into the body that Kaoru had possessed when he entered the NSCS. Mitsuo and Miyashita, unaware that their world was a simulation, could never have understood the true mechanism behind Takayama's resurrection. But there were complications. In the loop world, Ryuji Takayama was officially dead. Kaoru couldn't simply return and reclaim his former identity, he needed a new one. With Mitsuo's help, he assumed the identity of Seiji Kashiwada, a man who had been reported missing. Together, they created a convincing persona, identification, credit cards, insurance, and every document needed to make the new identity appear legitimate. So just to make sure that you're still following, he was born in the loop as Tetsuo Yamamura, Sadako's brother, but at 2 years old, his mom took him away and renamed him Ryuji Takayama to hide his identity. He eventually got the ring virus and died, but he was reborn into the natural world as Kaoru Futami. Then, he was scanned back into the loop to be Ryuji Takayama again, this time assuming a new identity, Seiji Kashiwada. On June 27th, he visited his old school friend Mitsuo along the Toei coastline. He sensed his friend's anger at being used and manipulated. Remember, Mitsuo was the guy who was basically forced into a position where he had to offer his DNA splicing skills to resurrect Sadako in order to get his own son back and save his own life. And it was all set up in a way that makes it look like Ryuji was allying himself to Sadako Yamamura. But there was no way for Ryuji to defend himself without revealing the truth about Loop. What Mitsuo didn't know was that it was Cristoph Eliot, the creator of Loop, orchestrating everything from the start. He had been the invisible hand guiding everything. Eliot was the one who had encoded the message for Mitsuo to find, who carefully manipulated the events, and who dangled the return of Mitsuo's son as an incentive, all to ensure Ryuji's resurrection. At 2 p.m. the same day, Ryuji headed further down the beach to a specific place. This moment had been prearranged with Cristoph back in the natural world. The plan was for Cristoph to allow Kaoru's parents and lover to access footage of the loop to be able to see him, and so he could tell them that he was going to fix everything and to be able to say goodbye. In the end, it was only Reiko who saw her lover, Kaoru, in the simulated world. She felt moved by her lover's sacrifice in order to save the natural world from the MHC virus. One of the few remaining scientists alive at the Loop Project set up a console at Reiko's home so that she could check in on Kaoru daily. She watched him every single day, and 6 months after Kaoru had left for New Mexico in the early months of 2038, Reiko gave birth to a son. Now I know what you're thinking. CZ, this isn't complicated at all yet. Well, don't worry, because this is where things are going to actually get complicated. From this point on, there are some inconsistencies within the last 3 books, Birthday, S, and Tide. We know from Shizuko's cousin, Takashi Yamamura, that sometimes the events that occurred in the loop weren't recorded accurately. In Tide, when asked if he had read a copy of Ring, he replied, "Which parts are real, which parts are fiction, even I can't say. There are obvious inconsistencies in the timeline, so I can only shrug." There's a little bit of a gray area at the beginning of the save state here. The inconsistencies across the 3 novels regard how many copies of Ryuji are reinstated into the loop, and exactly how he eliminates the ring virus to prevent the cancerization of the simulated world. There's also significant variation in how many Sadako clones are said to have been born. So we can try to fill in the gaps in these inconsistencies, but we can't know for sure which one is correct. Here are a few theories though. Theory number 1, the third copy theory. This theory attempts to cover all of the events of Birthday's short story Happy Birthday, S, and Tide, while trying to make sense of the major inconsistencies like how the ring virus was eradicated. No easy task. When Ryuji re-entered Loop, the system that replicated his DNA made an error and 3 copies of him were made. None of them were aware of the others, and the only clue that something was wrong were the fragmented memories of each copy. One man's memory had been split into 3 different people. Okay, think of Ryuji's mind like a hard drive. When he's split across multiple bodies, it's not that each version of him is a full clone, it's more like the consciousness was partitioned, the way that a hard drive can be divided into separate drives on your computer. Each partition can run its own system or hold different data, but at the end of the day, they call from the same original source. This is why none of the Ryuji copies have his full memory intact. And keep in mind that while there definitely are at least 2 copies mentioned in S and Tide, the third copy is only theoretical. My way of explaining Ryuji's appearance in one of the short stories in Birthday titled Happy Birthday. A third copy is never explicitly mentioned in S or Tide, but I guess that's why they call it a theory. a ring theory. The first copy, with the help of the scientist Mitsuo Ando, assumed the identity of Seiji Kashiwada. Using the skills carried over from his original identity, he became a math teacher. Seiji also tried to stop the spread of the ring virus by trying to prevent the ring book from getting published. After he failed, he tried to gather the copies that had been distributed, but before he got to them all, 4 Sadako clones had been born. He sealed off the effect of the ring virus within the books by adding a charm in the paperbacks, an illustration of eyeballs that acted like a vaccine once you read the novel. The antidote within the illustration would start working to erase the effect of the virus. It's a little tenuous, but we'll roll with it. He also dug up dirt on the lead actress, Kiyomi Sakata, in order to put pressure on the film studio to shelve the production of Ringu, the film adaptation. I never thought I'd see the cancel culture movement used for something so productive. With the virus in the book neutralized and the film cancelled, Seiji felt that the 4 clones posed no threat to Loop, but decided to monitor them closely as they grew up. The second copy of Ryuji was not planned, had no identity ready to assume, and lived like a ghost for the first year. Eventually, in 1992, he visited the Aokigahara forest, a location well known for a number of people entering with no intention of ever coming out. The second copy found the backpack of a man named Tetsu Kawaguchi, took his ID and house keys, and for the next 3 years lived under this new identity. Upon his return to the Loop, the second copy, now going under the name Tetsu Kawaguchi, was a friend and ally to Masako, the first Sadako clone. While Kawaguchi didn't always understand or agree with everything that Masako did, there was affection between the pair, and in June 1992, Masako gave birth to a daughter called Akane Maruyama. It's implied in S and Tide that Kawaguchi was the father of Akane. Now, this raises many questions when you remember that Kawaguchi is a copy of Ryuji and Masako is a copy of Sadako, who were siblings. Maybe because they're copies, it's okay? I don't make the rules, but I feel better about it if I just assume that Kawaguchi isn't the biological father so much as he just feels a level of responsibility and fatherly affection. The third copy of Ryuji would have been the version that met Ando on the beach in June 1991 and had also spoken to Kaoru's lover, Reiko, from the natural world. He spent 6 months hidden away in a laboratory lent to him by Miyashita researching the ring virus. He slowly unraveled all of the clues hidden inside of his own cells, and by June in 1991, he had synthesized a vaccine for the ring virus and the MHC virus. The third copy also created a virus to attack the Sadako clones that had already been born. The virus increased the rate of the clone's cellular division, leading them to rapidly age and die naturally. A consequence was that the third copy of Ryuji also became infected with the virus, and in 1994, he died, which would explain why we only meet the first and second copy in Tide. Moving on, this leads into the main events of Tide. In April 1993, a young woman named Haruna Tajima visited the Irojiri ruins and archaeological museum, wanting to see a clay figurine of a woman depicted in the style of Medusa with snakes on her head. From the earliest days of the Jomon era, the ancient time period in Japan during which many sacred artifacts were created, there was a deep connection between humans and animals. However, it wasn't until the Middle Jomon period, particularly with the emergence of Sakazuki-style pottery, that the symbolism of snakes began to take shape. I find it interesting that the pit viper was a powerful emblem of resurrection, representing the cycle of death and rebirth, an endless repeating loop. During the visit, a storm broke out above, and the ruins and the clay snakes on the statue disappeared. Haruna, the student who had come to visit the statue, was never the same after this incident. There were dramatic changes to her personality, and eventually she collapsed and ended up in the hospital in an almost petrified state, her body gradually turning to stone. In 1995, another student, Rie Yuna, was visiting her friend in the hospital and had annotated chirps that a bird was making outside the window. She believed it was Haruna trying to find a way to communicate with her and was using the bird as a channel. Worried about her friend, the fellow student approached her math teacher, Seiji Kashiwada, the first copy, for help. Seiji took the notes that Rie Yuna had made of the bird's song and realized that there was a code hidden within them. He had dealt with encrypted messages in binary in the past as both Ryuji in Loop and as Kaoru in the natural world. It dawned on him that this message was not intended for Rie Yuna, but for him. Decoding what he could, he was led to the island of Izu Oshima, the birthplace of the original Sadako. In search of answers, Seiji visited the cave of an ascetic, someone who practiced ascetic training or spiritual discipline through rigorous practices in nature to attain enlightenment or supernatural powers. Everything that had occurred involving Sadako Yamamura and Ryuji Takayama could all be traced back to this particular ascetic from the 7th century called Enno Ozunu. The visit to the cave ended in Seiji's near death after it collapsed, but undeterred, he then visited the Yamamura Inn, where he eventually discovered that Shizuko's son didn't really die at 4 months old. And remember, Ryuji Takayama at the very beginning was the son of Shizuko and brother of Sadako. He just wasn't aware of his true identity. After a visit to the now boarded up and abandoned rental cabins at the South Hakone Pacific Land, Seiji, the first copy of Ryuji, returned home. A week later, he and Ria, his student, visited Haruna at the hospital, and it was there that they came face to face with Tetsu Kawaguchi, the second copy. Kawaguchi was at the hospital with Masako, the Sadako clone, as she had been deteriorating over the last 4 years with illness. Kawaguchi was equally surprised to see Seiji. Before either copy could speak to each other, Seiji was overcome by something unknown. He collapsed to the floor, lost the use of his own body, and felt his consciousness being trapped at the bottom of a small space, similar to that of a well. A voice rang in his ears that said, "This time, it's your turn." Tetsu Kawaguchi took Seiji Kashiwada back to his place and kept him hidden. Seiji was technically alive. He ate, used the bathroom, and was able to move at a basic level. His mind, however, was still trapped in the well, trapped there by his sister, Sadako. Unsure if Seiji would ever regain control of his body, Kawaguchi decided he would take on his doppelganger's identity. They looked identical, and the Seiji persona was far more reliable, being backed up with legal documents. Masako, the Sadako clone, died in the summer of 1995. She had become infected with the virus that the third copy of Ryuji had created. Over 4 years, she lived with illness, and her spine deteriorated until she ended up in a wheelchair. At the hospital, Kawaguchi spoke with Mitsuo Ando, which again is Ryuji's old school friend, and he's the scientist who performed the operations necessary for Sadako and Ryuji to be reborn as clones. Mitsuo asked Kawaguchi to take Akane, aka Masako's daughter. When he refused, Mitsuo agreed to take her as the first enrollee at an orphanage that he was opening. Before leaving the hospital, Kawaguchi, which again is the second copy, now using Seiji's identity, saw Haruna. The student, who was hours ago still in a petrified state, was now awake and walking. It didn't take Kawaguchi long to realize what had happened. Masako had died at 7:24 a.m., and Haruna had woken up at 7:30 a.m. Sadako, who had only temporarily dwelled in Masako's body, had been waiting for a better host. She found one in Haruna. So Kawaguchi hired a private investigator to look into Sadako, through which he discovered Sadako's tragic childhood. How her mother had faked her death, chose to live a new life with her son, but abandoned her daughter. To Kawaguchi, everything now made sense. The only balm for Sadako would be to witness the suffering of the one who had been chosen over herself. And in turn, that would be the ultimate revenge on the mother who abandoned her, taking the life of the one that she chose. Sadako's curse, the ring virus, had always been intended to reach and kill her brother, Ryuji Takayama. That's why the cursed tape arc had ended so abruptly. Once it had killed Ryuji, it had served its purpose, and it vanished. At least that was Kawaguchi's theory. At this point, we reach the events that are covered in the final act of the 6th book, Tide. And as a disclaimer here, out of this whole series, it's probably the part that I am least a fan of, and that could be because it's the part that I understand the least. Keep in mind that there's no official English translation of Tide. As of writing, it's the only one that hasn't been translated. So I'm basically going off translation apps at this point. I'm already not crazy about the idea of Sadako's whole curse being to get revenge on Ryuji, and the ending is, well, I'll just tell you what happens next. Kawaguchi traveled to Kinpusenji Shugendo headquarters in Yoshino along with the body of Seiji Kashiwada, so both copies of Ryuji went there together. They journeyed across the Omine Okugaki Michi pilgrimage route between Yoshino and Kumano with a party of 50 people. At the end of the journey, the party stopped at a lodge for food and rest, but during the dinner, the 50 guests, the tour guide, and the body of Seiji Kashiwada all just disappear. Kawaguchi realized that all 50 participants had been ghosts, shadows of the people who had taken the pilgrimage in the past. And what's weird about this is it's the only supernatural event that is never rationally explained through technology or glitches in the Matrix. This could be the author, Koji Suzuki, telling us that in the end we'll never be able to explain everything that we don't understand. There will always be mysteries beyond our reach. Anyway, the result of this journey is that the 2 copies of Ryuji, Seiji and Kawaguchi, had gone through a spiritual process as they journeyed through the mountains, and the 2 fragments were now rejoined together. However, the 3rd copy, who is again only theoretical and not mentioned in Tide, had died the previous year in 1994, so his memories will always be missing. Which is my makeshift explanation of why the recombined Ryuji doesn't remember creating a virus that kills Sadako clones in the other books that follow chronologically. Are you confused yet? Don't worry. Let's just take a moment, let that sink in. Okay. Now I'll explain the simple version. There are inconsistencies between the 5th and 6th books, S and Tide. In order to explain them, my theory number 1, is that when Ryuji re-entered the loop, he was actually split into 3 pieces, not 2. But one of them died, so now those memories are lost. I think we can move forward now. The recombined entity chose to remain under the identity Seiji Kashiwada, the one with all of the legal documents, and he continued working as a math teacher. Back in 1991, he had agreed to tutor the son of Kiyomi Sakata, the actress who had the lead role in the Ringu film before it was cancelled. In 1999, Seiji refused to tutor the boy, Hideyuki Nimura, any longer. Nimura had developed an unhealthy obsession with Ring, originating from his mother almost being the lead in the film. One day, Nimura had stolen information off of Seiji's laptop on the existence and location of the 4 Sadako clones and of Akane, the daughter of the original Sadako clone. When Nimura realized Sadako existed in his world, he began kidnapping and killing the clones. clones. His first victim died in June 2003, and her body was discovered in July. Over the course of a year and 3 months, he killed the other 3 clones. Seiji tried to save the clones, thinking that they didn't pose a threat. When Nimura captured the 12-year-old Akane, Seiji was able to save her, but was mistaken for the killer and arrested in September 2004. So by keeping track of the clones and trying to prevent Nimura from killing them, he had accidentally left traces of evidence along the way. In 2010, an 18-year-old Akane met a boy named Takanori Ando. This was the son of Mitsuo Ando. There are so many characters and connections, I feel like my head is going to explode. I'm keeping track of everything, don't worry, but I think after this my next video is gonna have to be covering a nice dumb slasher. Give my brain a break. Okay, Seiji Kashiwada, now mistaken as a serial killer, was convicted and then executed on May 19th, 2016 at 10:04 a.m. Ryuji Takayama had always searched for answers to the universe and had found ways to cheat death again and again, whether it was being reborn in the natural world as Kaoru or re-entering the loop as Seiji Kashiwada. So faced with death once again, Seiji used his will to enter a camera, becoming digital in form. So now he's a digital artifact within the digital world of the loop save state. During the same month, Takanori and Akane hired a car and went for an overnight break. The navigation system in the car tried to lead them to a particular location, and being curious with nothing else to do, they decided to see where it was leading them. They arrived at South Hakone Pacific Land, where all that was left standing was a tennis court and information center. The cabins were now just ruins, with only the well left standing. The time of Seiji Kashiwada's death by execution was the exact same time that Takanori and Akane conceived their first child while away on their trip. Takanori and Akane, now expecting a child, planned to marry. Akane was teaching in a school and Takanori worked in video processing. One day, he was given a video on a USB by his boss to analyze. The video contained footage of a man who appeared to have become a mental health statistic. Takanori noticed little details in the video, such as there being a copy of Ring on a bookshelf in the background. He also recognized the apartment's location based on the view out the window. The apartment in the video was a room 303 at Shinagawa View Heights. If that sounds familiar, it's because this was the apartment that Mei Takano lived in while she was a student of Ryuji's, and where Sadako stayed after she was reborn. The location leads Takanori and Akane to Hideyuki Nomura, but the pair remain unaware that he is the killer of the Sadako clones and the one who kidnapped Akane when she was 12. Takanori began to suspect that the man in the video might be Nomura. As he reviewed a copy he had made of the file, he noticed subtle differences from the original. The man's position seemed to have shifted, but when he checked the original tape, those differences weren't there. The mutation had occurred only in the copy, a glitch in reality. This phenomenon, mutation through replication, is something that we often see in Loop. The anomalies in the copy of the video continued to evolve until one night the man's face became clear. Akane recognized him immediately. It was Seiji Kashiwada, the man that she believed had kidnapped her. Takanori's investigation into Seiji Kashiwada eventually led him to the novel Ring, and from there, a series of revelations unfolded. He discovered that Akane was Sadako, that Seiji Kashiwada was Ryuji, and that he had met Ryuji as a child after both had been reborn from Sadako's womb. He also uncovered the identity of the real killer, Nomura. One night, Seiji appeared on Takanori's computer monitor and explained to the young couple all of the events surrounding the virus and the deaths of the clones. Seiji told Akane he was her father and asked Takanori to take care of her. Earlier that same night, Nomura, the killer, fell to his death from his Shinagawa station platform, compelled by Akane in an act to protect herself and her unborn baby. Then, the following year, in 2017, Akane and Takanori's child was born. With Akane becoming a mother, Sadako became something more than just a curse. No longer just a vessel of horror and decay, she was now a part of something protective and nurturing. Something that created life instead of destroying it. For so long, she had been seen as a monster, as a force of vengeance, but through Akane and her child, Sadako's legacy had shifted into something new. So that takes us to the end of the loop save state, if we assume that theory number 1 is correct. It doesn't solve all the inconsistencies, there is still some fluctuation with the number of Sadako clones in existence, but it does answer a lot of questions. And this is gonna sound crazy, but it's actually the simplest solution because it fits everything into just 3 timelines. Theory number 2 is what I call the second save state theory. In this scenario, when Ryuji Takayama re-entered the loop, he was split into 2 copies, Seiji Kashiwada and Tetsu Kawaguchi. Their chain of events still unfolded the same way, preventing the production of the film, putting charms in the books to act as a vaccine to the ring virus, Haruna, the student, being possessed by Sadako, and the 2 copies rejoining into Ryuji on the pilgrimage. Then, the 4 Sadako clones are killed by the serial killer Nomura, and Takanori and Akane have a child of their own. So most of the events play out the same, but this time, with all of the Sadakos eradicated except for Akane, they believe the threat of Sadako had been eliminated, but they were wrong. The Sadako who had possessed Haruna, the student, eventually became dangerous, and the loop save state eventually became cancerized, just like the original file. Cristoph Eliot, the creator of Loop, reset time to send Ryuji's clone back to 1991 to try again, thus creating a new save state. So it's actually in the second save state where the events of Birthday's short story Happy Birthday play out. Ryuji creates a vaccine for the ring virus, and he creates a counter virus designed to kill the Sadako clones. Then Ryuji dies in 1994. This explains the variation in the number of clones, and why Seiji never mentioned making a virus to kill the clones. Those things never happened in his reality. But the problem with this theory is that there's just no evidence that this is what Koji Suzuki intended. It's more of a band-aid for a potential plot hole than it is uncovering some hidden lore. And finally, I present to you theory number 3, the loop within the loop. In this premise, Kaoru re-enters the loop and becomes the Ryuji depicted in Birthday, aka he synthesized a vaccine and created the counter-virus that would kill off the Sadako clones first, but became infected by the virus himself and died on the street in 1994. The events of S and Tide, involving Ryuji getting split into 2 copies and Takanori hooking up with Akane, all actually took place in a loop within Loop. A simulated world within the simulated world. Okay, bear with me here. If Loop was designed to be the same as the natural world in every way, it's not hard to believe that there was someone in Loop who thought like Cristoph Eliot. We could theorize that that person created their own simulated world in the exact image of the Loop world. I think the biggest flaw in this theory is the fact that a whole nother world inside of Loop implies an infinite number of loops. At some point, the physical computers running all of this would run out of processing power, right? Unless the world that I've been referring to as the natural world is also a simulation, and there's also an infinite number of loops going up the other direction, in which case there would be infinitely larger computers processing all this. In any event, it's very strange that the inconsistencies between Birthday and then S and Tide exist at all, because they were all written by the same author, one after another. It's not like someone was trying to retcon him. Either he slipped up, or he wanted fans to come up with their own theories like this. It's more likely that he slipped up because of the 13-year gap between novels. My favorite one out of the ones that I presented is probably Theory 2, the second save state, the idea that the first attempts to prevent the ring virus failed, and Ryuji was forced to go back to a second save state, which succeeded. Maybe it's because it reminds me of simpler times playing Pokemon. Or maybe it's because I like the clean ending where all the Sadakos are eradicated and the threat of the ring virus was finally neutralized. Despite the inconsistencies and convoluted plots of the 3 theories, Cristoph and Kaoru's plans to defeat the MHC virus in the natural world succeeded. When Kaoru re-entered the loop, his genetic information became digitized, and by taking the telomerase sequence from his DNA, they were able to introduce it into the cells of the people infected with the MHC virus with outstanding results. The MHC virus was no longer something to be feared, and the natural worlds could begin healing. What began with a cursed videotape in a holiday cabin ends with questions about the very nature of life, reality, and the code that binds it all together. After exploring the full franchise, Ring is no longer just a story about Sadako's curse. It's about the way that fear evolves. From ghosts to genes, from superstition to simulation. This universe has reflected our shifting anxieties across decades. In the end, the Ring timeline goes beyond supernatural horror. It's a warning that in a world where information spreads like infection, where our realities might be coded simulations, and where even death can be digitized, the most terrifying thing is that we may never know what's real and what's artificial. If you made it to the end of this video, congratulations. Your brain may in fact be fried at this point if you tried to keep up with all the information that I threw at you, but don't worry. If Koji Suzuki is correct, your brain is just a hard drive swimming with ones and zeros. This video is actually just the beginning. See, this project started as an attempt to do the Sadako horror history episode, but I quickly realized that that video was going to be a mess if I didn't explain the timeline first. And that intro just got bigger and more complicated, like your ex-girlfriend when she started taking birth control. And eventually the timeline just became its own video, so the Sadako horror history will be a separate video. So if you love horror, if you're interested in learning more about the insane history of Ring, or if you just need a new YouTube channel to watch, remember to subscribe to CZsWorld for new horrors every week. Ring the death bell. Get it? Ring the death bell? Come on, that's worth a sub right there. Ring the death bell, and I'll see you in the next one, assuming we both survive.